Hello to everyone and welcome again to another one of our Ignite sessions. This is number 8. Hopefully everyone is continuing to keep well in the lockdown. I know the end is potentially in sight. If you've not joined us before, this is our series of webinars designed really to share useful content and keep people inspired whilst they're working from home. So last week we had Forge co-founder Stephen Melford. He shared the FOG behaviour change model from Stanford University. It's a useful model when trying to understand why behaviour is changing in a category or how to influence it yourselves. And if you're interested in that kind of thing, it's going to be going up live on our Ignite Ignite newsletter and on our social channels tomorrow. So keep an eye out there. You can find the URLs to the social channels in the chat feed. I'll put those in there shortly. This week, we are very excited to be welcoming two very special guests to Ignite. We have Jen Whyte and Nicola Mclaren, who will introduce themselves to you shortly. The topic of today's talk is all about why insight is so important to helping us navigate the post-lockdown world we are entering into, and how to build the teams and get the insight necessary we need to move our businesses forward. Forge co-founder Simon Garnett is going to be the host and question master. So if you have any questions for Nicola, Jen or Simon, post them in the chat feed and Simon will pick them up as we go. Right, so that's enough from me. Over to you, Simon.
Brilliant, thanks Adam. Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. So we've got probably about half an hour for the conversation today, and I will introduce you to Jen and Nicola in a second. But just to echo Adam's point, these sessions work best when they are fluid and they feel like as close to a conversation as we can get, given where we all are around the country, around the globe. So please just feel free to put any comments, any questions into the chat. I will pick up on them as soon as they come in, and we'll make sure that kind of we don't miss anything. So please do share your comments. So I said, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Nicola and Jen today. Maybe if I hand over to you both one at a time to kind of introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your background, your experience, and what you're up to at the moment. Maybe Jen, I'll start with you.
Okay. So 3 weeks ago today, I left Unilever. It was my last day after entering my 20th year with the company, and planning on moving back to Scotland at some point, but everything is on hold. So, and I want to enter the world of freelancing, and that's really what I'm up to. But everything's just at a stop at the moment. But hey ho, it's lovely weather and it's great to be outside.
Very good.
Nicola, over to you.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. Hi to the people I know and to those I don't. So I also recently left Unilever. There's a trend here. I left back in January after 30 years, so working across marketing, insight, and most recently sustainability. So for the last 10 years, I worked on the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, driving the various brands within Unilever to develop their purpose and deliver on their purpose. So I left, as I said, at the beginning of the year to set up my own, and that's going well, but as you can imagine, slower than I might have hoped with the crisis currently on, but lots of opportunity to connect with people and sort of build understanding and share points of view and to join sessions like this. So thanks very much for having us.
Absolute pleasure. Brilliant. Thank you. Well, as we all know, COVID is throwing a whole load of curveballs at us, but I want to start maybe just kind of pre-COVID. Obviously, with both of your experience at Unilever, a company that's right at the forefront of thinking about insight and kind of trying to make sure that the business is as prepared for the changing kind of nature of stuff. I'd like to understand a little bit from both of your perspectives, pre-COVID, what were some of the kind of big things that you were seeing, both in terms of building a kind of strong and resilient and kind of future-proofed insight function, and also kind of more broadly within the sort of insight industry? What were some of the kind of big themes that you were focused on? I don't know who either of you want to start first.
Want me to start, Nicola?
Yeah, go on, Jen.
Yeah, I mean, at Unilever, it was all about, and there's several people on the phone who've worked or work for Unilever. It was all about for CMI, for Consumer Market Insight. It was really all about speed, cost, and delivering impact. And it was about half the time, half the cost, double the impact. And that was our mantra within the Consumer Market Insight community. And that was what we delivered to, or what we were aiming to deliver to, from just a consumer and team's point of view. And I don't, to be honest, I don't think that is going to change. I really don't. And I know, we'll come on to talking about post-COVID in a moment once Nicola's had her say, but I really don't think that will change very much. If anything, the speed and cost elements will become even more difficult.
Yeah. Okay, great. Nicola, how about yourself?
Yeah, so I think the main challenge pre and during COVID really is to ensure that we continue to build a really human and personal connection with consumers. So from an insight perspective, because I think if you have that, and if you can understand the everyday tensions that people are facing, and then consider how you as a brand can react to those, help address those challenges, those everyday issues, then you can ensure that you stay relevant, you stay meaningful, and therefore, obviously you drive brand growth. And I think, especially as you were saying then, Jen, with the move to some of this kind of like cheaper, faster tools, is that one of the needs we have to ensure that we continue to meet is that while we look to leverage all the, this huge raft of different digital tools available to us to drive insight, is that actually a lot of them drive kind of information and observation, but it only becomes insight when you bring the human interaction and the human interpretation. So I think ensuring that we move from that level of observation, and big data is fantastic if you look into it. And I read something you posted the other day, Simon, if you go into existing data or new data, whether that's big quant data or qualitative perspectives, and you look for a story, you go in with a hypothesis and change that hypothesis each time, then you can look for new insight. But otherwise you're just left with facts and information which is going to just drown out the insight that you're looking for.
Yeah, I'm with you. So really interesting there. I'm kind of intrigued to understand, and clearly, there'll be certain things that you can talk about, and I'm sure things you can't. But when you think about that kind of drive for double the speed, double the impact, twice the cost, half the cost, half the speed, twice the
half the cost.
Not double the speed. That doesn't work. I wish. There's some optimistic thinking from me. So when you think about that, obviously that's been a journey that the business has been on for quite a long time. What particular successes do you think the business really enjoyed in the kind of in the sort of months and years coming up to COVID, and any areas that that the business was finding hard and was still the kind of must try and deliver and find better ways of achieving?
So I'll start with one of the successes, which also gives me a chance to talk about the sustainability of brands with purpose, because I want to get that in early, because that's my bag. So one of the things we did was that we recognised that every time a brand was starting to consider its purpose journey, especially those brands that were right at the beginning, they were doing some kind of landscape scan to get a sense of, what, like I was talking about just now, what are the tensions, what are the issues that people are facing, what's happening in the competitive market, and not just your immediate category competitors, but, more broadly, what are brands doing, what are the different issues by country, what shows up for people rather than what just shows up in the news. So what are people really touched by? And we were repeating that time and time and time again. And yet, if you do that and do it the best way, you don't do it through a brand lens, because as soon as you bring a brand lens, you start to bring a bias, and it becomes more subjective. So if you're doing that from an objective perspective, then actually it's work that you should be able to repeat. So rather than it's work that you should be able to use again, rather than just repeat. So we worked with that to turn that into a model. We identified a number of different tensions, some universal truths that we felt played out, globally, which brand teams could then take and with that start point, which was obviously a lot more robust, because we've done it really thoroughly to ensure we could use it across categories, across countries, across different issues and markets, as I said. Then you had something that you could really work with, and then start to bring the brand lens and start to dive into the elements that you thought were most relevant to you as a brand. And increase speed.
Yeah, I'm sure that's something that will resonate with everyone on the call, that that tendency to repeat same or at least very similar projects multiple times across different brands and divisions, and actually finding a singular, very robust source of that can work across multiple things. I think, no, great example. Jen, anything else you would add?
No, I mean, Nicola's right about, I think one of the advantages that a role that Nicola had was that she saw right across the business and was able to kind of join the dots and pull people together and say, you don't need to do that piece of work because somebody else has done it, just take theirs. And I think because of the half the cost issue as well, yeah, you can speed up your tools, but sometimes you still want to do a good piece of strategic qualitative research, which does cost money and you have to invest in that. But that means then that there was a lot more of repurposing of work that's gone by, or digging deeper. So I conducted an H&E study, a habits and attitudes study, in 26 markets over the course of 3 years. And, you know, we really, really utilized that data. We mined it and mined it and mined it and repurposed it and repurposed it and repurposed it, so that, and you were just mining and mining and mining and bringing out insights to help the business. And and I think there will be a lot more of that going forwards.
I think another bit of a way to win, be careful what I say here, is if you position things in stages. Because sometimes if you go into, like, so I'm kind of working almost like, for the brand who's almost like my clients. So if you're saying to them, this is what we recommend you do as a piece of work, and it starts, at the very beginning and finishes at the very end, and you show them all the time and the cost involved, it can just be too daunting. So if you can kind of chunk that up into stages and say, actually, okay, we'll talk through this stage, and that's going to take this amount of time and cost you this much money, and then we can pause and think, okay, what do we want to do now? Now the next stage might be what you'd already mapped out, but actually you might change and you might not need to do as much work, or you might be able to do it in less time. But the promise is never that you're going to cut cost or cut time. It's more that you can make impact more regularly, and therefore people have a sense of momentum that can therefore get more engaged.
Brilliant, really clear. Jen, I wanted to pick up on something you mentioned, because you talked about, as a result of kind of half the cost challenge, it was forcing you into certain behaviors. And often when that happens, there can be a sense of compromise. Is that ideally what I would have done if I didn't have to? And I'm fascinated to understand, did the business feel like there were compromises made, or actually has that just been an incredibly positive? And then when we think about what might happen the other side of COVID, again, where do you sit on that idea of changes being forced upon us and therefore being compromised versus actually being just better ways to do things?
Nicola and I were talking about that yesterday, actually. The behaviour change. She's got a little kind of her dog story that I hope she brings in at some point. I don't think
we're all here.
I don't think that you have to. I've worked in smaller brands, and Anna Creed is on the phone, and we worked on a small brand in laundry with a very small budget versus a much bigger brand with a much bigger budget. So, you were able to do all sorts of things. You did not fling money at things, but you were able to do bigger pieces of work with the bigger brand. But the smaller brand, you really had to eke things out and you're a lot more creative when you've got less money. Definitely. And I think as well, for suppliers, for people who work with companies like Unilever, I think you've got to think about, well, what's the all singing, all dancing piece of work that we can do, but also what's a more practical, more probably that's going to meet their smaller demands or meet the brief in a smaller scale level and within the budget that they've got, the client has got at the moment. I do think I quite like a stop and have a little pause as well once you've done a piece of work. Is this are we doing it? Are we going in the right way, or should we kind of like pivot and relook at it in a different way?
Right, Nicola, I feel like we need the dog story.
Tell you the dog story. Also, the other thing I might say as well was that we did more probably piloting as well. So maybe as Jen said, the work that I was doing was more across brands and therefore across categories and countries, but sometimes starting with a brand in a market and showcasing what it could be, because the question is, are people happy to adjust to something that feels like it's a compromise? Well, if you can prove it's worth, then yes, because then they know that it's still going to work to address their needs. So sometimes we would just do that as a pilot to showcase the success that you could have by doing something that was speedier and less costly.
Right.
My dogs. Do you want to hear about my dogs?
Yes,
I won't they cause havoc. So I live in Wimbledon, so I walk up on Wimbledon Common, and we were talking about behaviour change through COVID, And up till recently, they were saying on the comment, there was a request which said, that's how I interpreted it, please keep your dogs on a lead. Now, one of my dogs is a puppy, and she needs to be off the lead and running, or she's just causing me chaos. So I'd keep the dogs on the lead, and we'd walk through the open part of the common, and then disappear into the bushes and through into the woods, and I'd let them off the lead. This week, why, given the change in lockdown, I'm not sure, it now says you must keep your dogs on the lead. And I just realized that made me respond very differently, because I felt that actually, while the request was worded differently, if anybody asked me why I didn't have my dogs on the lead, I could articulate it and say, well, it's a request and this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. As soon as it says you must, anybody who sees me with my dogs off my lead is going to they can have it inhibit my enjoyment of the walk, because they're going to scowl at me, or the warden's going to tell me off or something. So it was just sensing how my own behaviour changed once we're told to make what could be seen as a compromise.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I can walk in Richmond Park as well, because you can have the dogs off the lead there.
Bonus. There's a question that's coming from Anna. How do the team see brands using the communities that are flourishing around brands as we have gone through lockdown? So kind of, communities coming up, being very, obviously big part of what we are seeing at the moment around brands. How do you feel about that, and what may continue post-COVID?
I think one brand in particular that I'd mention, and it'd be nice, Anna and others, it'd be great to hear other brands that you think are doing well too. But looking at the work that Brewdog has done, I think they've done really well at connecting with their target audience, because they're doing it in, they're doing it quite, quite bold. They've been quite bold, and all their sanitizer was branded. They're not, they're not just being altruistic. We know that no brand works just from altruism alone. But they were doing something that was quite funky and quite fun, and appealing potentially to their younger target market, was with a hand sanitizer, which if it's just labeled by a more traditional mainstream brand might not be quite so attractive. Getting a lot of free PR and higher profile amongst the target audience, connecting people as well, which I know there's been a lot of it, but they were having like sort of virtual bars that you could go and join and drink in. And then now they've just posted something recently about their mission going forward, and how that they're doing a really good job at making a lot of sustainable changes to their business, but their aspiration and their mission is to be the most sustainable beer on the planet, and this is what they're doing, and this is how they're achieving it. So I think they've really used the community that they've built up during COVID as a way of then addressing that same community with a message that they wanted to get across, that's broader than the COVID story. Yeah,
I think it's fascinating. The thing, just as you're talking, the thing that sort of prompts in me is that I like about them is, it doesn't feel like their tone has changed considerably during COVID. And I think about the number of brands whose tone feels like it's just shifted completely, and suddenly I'm hearing messages of empathy from brands that used to make me laugh, and it just, I don't know, just Jen, you were about to say.
No, the one I noticed the other night, because if you watch normal television with adverts, and I was actually, and you can sometimes think, oh my God, they all blend into one, all the COVID ads, you can predict the music, total blend. And then the one that stood out for me was KFC. I don't know whether anybody else has noticed it, but that was and it's something, I have never been into a KFC store in my life, but I noticed it. I noticed the brand, I noticed the communication, and I just thought, spot on, absolutely spot on.
Yeah, I rather agree. Thank you, Anna, for the question. If there's any follow-up, please let me know. And for anyone else, please do share any questions as we go through, just in the chat function at the bottom of your screen. I'll just kind of then keep going a little bit further on COVID. So Jen, you talked earlier about, Unilever's mission. Let me try and get it right this time. Half the cost, half the time, double the impact.
Yeah.
That isn't going to go anywhere anytime soon. And in fact, if anything, post-COVID is going to become more important. What kind of changes do you think we might see? Either things just increasing or becoming more and more important, or things potentially going on the back burner, becoming less important? And there's really kind of multiple lenses that you can answer that through. You can answer that from a kind of consumer point of view, from a business, overall corporate point of view, from an insight team point of view specifically. I'm just intrigued.
It's funny. I'm concerned going forwards about spontaneity. So and because the way of working is not going to change. We're still all going to be in Zoom calls. We're still all going to be in Microsoft Teams. Everything's still going to be done remotely for businesses like ours for the foreseeable future. And when I think of teams, and I think of my lovely insight team in deodorants that I worked with, you know, and I think so much of the enjoyment and the learning process of learning from each other was just by being physically around each other and hearing those conversations, listening to those conversations. And I know people talk about the water cooler conversations or the coffee chat or whatever, but actually it's just like, for example, sitting down, you know, sitting near somebody and I'm overhearing a conversation and I would join in that particular conversation. And I think, you know, now at the moment you've got to book in time. When have you got time to do a Zoom call? Have you got time next week? Oh yes, let's meet. But then you lose that spontaneity. So how do we bring people along? How do we develop them? Because so much of our learning is on the job, you know, as opposed to doing something digitally like this. So that, for me, thinking that, like, you know, moving forwards, how do you get round that? I mean, I don't have an answer for it, but it's a question, and it's a concern that I have for insights teams, particularly.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because, yeah, absolutely, I can see it from a development point of view, but I also think it's true for just projects themselves. You know, so much of the gold in projects comes from the informal conversations, the people putting two and two things together and just making some gold from it. Nicola, how about yourself? Any views as to, you know, as we come out of the sort of lockdown, the immediate things that will become more important, less important? Sorry, Nicola.
Nicola, you're on mute.
There we go. It wouldn't be a Zoom call if we didn't have at least one of us do it. And trust me, it'll be me anytime soon. So go again, Nicola.
So yes, I think what I was saying earlier about the sort of the human and personal connection will be all the more important. And if we're going to continue to be able to work as agile and at speed that brands have been these last few weeks, you know, we've seen such rapid change and such action. You know, how can we continue to maintain that? Well, I think brands need to be even more connected in and more human and personal in that connection with consumers to enable even more rapid change. I think the challenge comes with kind of the amount of uncertainty. I mean, you know, we talk about sort of what level of behaviour change do we expect to see after COVID. I think, you know, whatever you have by way of an unconscious bias, you can get that confirmed on LinkedIn, you know, with one click. Either the world is never going to be anything like we've ever known it before, or else it's going to stay exactly the same. And I guess we don't know. So I think for me, the challenge is the uncertainty and the issue that brings less sort of for insight and more for foresight, which of course is relevant for all of us. We all need to make sure we're relevant and meaningful in a year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 years time. If we don't have the same level of confidence in our foresight and our ability to predict, then how will clients take on board what we're putting to them? Yeah,
it's going to be fascinating, won't it? And hindsight doesn't judge us very kindly when it comes to making rapid predictions on things like that. So yeah, very tough, very interesting. Just got another question in from Shona this time. Hi Jen, but I'm sure also to Nicola as well. But hi Jen, questions from me on market development. How do we value recession? How do we do value? Hi Shona. With the imminent incoming recession, no doubt, without devaluing categories. And if I can just add one thing to this question, which I thought was interesting, something I saw this morning on LinkedIn was just a point someone made, which is oftentimes, you know, recessions aren't, we don't have a lot of time to prepare for a recession, right? It comes into us straight away and hits. And in some ways, this recession is possibly slightly different. I mean, I know it sort of sounds quite stupid when, you know, last quarter everything was fine and then this quarter it's all disaster. But given that we've had this period in lockdown, we're almost sort of primed as to what's going to happen once things start to come out the other side. So I'd be really interested in any thoughts as to what you think the implications will be for value and kind of how consumers see brands as we come out of recession. Or go into recession.
So, yeah, no, it's funny. And then I was thinking, well, in 2008, and I look at Anna Creed on the phone and Trish McLaughlin, and we were all ex-laundry, and Rosie O'Malley, we were all ex-laundry people. You know, we've been through recession. And I remember, you know, 2008, 2009, and yes, it was just more or less one day to the next, whereas we have had time to prepare for this one. And the advantage I think we have this time is we've been through one already fairly recently. And so therefore, we will have learnings from that. And I think you need to take these forward. And we talked, Nicola's we were talking about behaviour change. What behaviours will we take with us? Some things will change, at that spectrum of will things change, nothing will change, to everything will change. I think it will be somewhere in the middle. And I think for some categories will benefit from this, and some categories, like my category that I worked on for the last 10 years, is not benefiting and won't benefit from this. Going forward, it'll be a harder job for some categories to get out of it, because behaviour change is, so if I worked in the deodorants category, and when so many people are working at home, they don't use a deodorant every day. We know that. So therefore there's less product being used. So there will be some categories like that, or the beer category. The beer category is another category. Nobody's drinking beer, or not as much beer. So that's a category that's suffering. Whereas other categories will be, cleansing, for example, will be just booming. So I think it's, when we come out of this, it will be, brands have to just keep communicating to their consumers and keep telling them what are the benefits of these brands. And that's what we talked about during the last recession, Shona, which probably you'll remember anyway, because you were around, I think, then. And I don't know whether Anna Creed wants to say something on that subject, because she was working with me at the time in laundry, and laundry was a hard category to work on at the time, because people stopped using fabric conditioners, for example. Yeah. So we had to persuade them to, reuse.
Can I just add to that, Jen? I think that's part of my question. So, my question really is, I lead conditioner market development for the hair category. And, we talk about maybe something like sort of your thoughts and your experience on we're talking about how do we drive value in the equivalent of comfort in hair, hair conditioners. Yeah. And they talk about, okay, well, sell more, for a cheaper version of the product. But how do you survive that recession, or how do you do that recession well without devaluing the total category? So as you come out of recession, you haven't wiped off the price of the category, as it were. So if you get any thoughts on that, that'd be great.
And I think it's, in some of the markets that we were in, we did introduce a third tier brand. But of course it wipes off some of your share from your top tier brand, and you've got, and then that creates problems within the business. But my advice is, and our advice from a CMI perspective was, do that as a last resort. Fight with the brands that you've got, because particularly the hair business that you operate in, it has fantastic brands. And also the other thing I remember, one of the key learnings from the last time as well, was about be really clear in the messaging to consumers and tell them what the benefits are. What are the benefits of your product? You actually have to be much clearer and talk to the benefits, talk more not in a less emotional way, but in a more pragmatic way than you perhaps normally do. But be really specific about what the benefits are. Why should I use your brand over that brand?
I think the other advantage and opportunity you've got within the hair category is that I know a lot more about personal care than I do most other categories. So we'll keep to this specific area. But the whole area of skincare and hair care are areas where going for a facial, or going for a haircut, or going to have these treatments, having your hair styled, all of those have risks associated with them in the perceived future because of COVID. And therefore, the more you can talk about self-care and the treatments and that luxury and that value that you can bring in home is, I think, where the opportunity lies. And therefore, utilising your community, utilising those tutorials and those simple ways to get that benefit and self-care without and mitigating risk, I think, is actually where there's a massive opportunity, actually.
Really interesting. Really interesting. There's also just a comment in from Rosie, and actually it aligns to a question, Nicola, I was going to ask you, which is a thought from Rosie on the recession point. Is it the moment perhaps for brands to really express their purpose, their why, and differentiate like that, not just by price and benefits. So, Nick, I'm just kind of interested in your perspective from a kind of purpose, sustainability kind of point of view. How do you think the world kind of post-COVID will respond?
Yeah, so I agree with what Jen was saying. It all the more important now to be relevant, to really show how you're relevant and how you continue to be relevant despite the kind of the changing circumstances, obviously, especially in economic downturn, which I think is going to be the biggest driver of change coming up. But yes, we've been talking for many years now, and it's become sort of much more sort of normal and active about purpose, and the fact that purpose continues to drive a relevance. It has to be built on the product itself, the brand itself. The product and the brand have to be related to the purpose, and those all three have to be meaningful to the person that you're talking to. But a purpose can continue to drive differentiation. It may not take the consumer into the category if they're questioning whether or not to continue buying into the category. But if they're entering the category, it can certainly drive differentiation at a time when all other functional benefits are being deemed sort of one and the same. Very
good, excellent. Folks, sadly, we're out of time. We, I'm sure, could have kept going for a long time. So thank you very much for the questions. Thank you for the replies. I'm just going to close by just asking both Nicola and Jen just one final question, which is, if you had to think about sort of one or two things that the insight industry, and that could be client-side teams, it could be just more industry insight professionals working, whether in freelance or as a partner supplier, one or two things that you think would be really key for everyone to be massively focused on in the next kind of 6-12 months as we start coming out of the lockdown and facing into the recessionary reality that we're going to have? Nicola, perhaps you'd like to
Mine would, Nicola, you go first.
Right, so for me, which I've already said a couple of times, but it's about being really connected to consumers. So if we really understand them and how their world is changing and how they are changing, that connection is going to be all the more important, along then with the agility and the speed to react, to address that. But I also think within that, and we touched on a bit, is not to be kind of like scaremongering that everything has changed, because actually I think one of the really important things is to look to what's consistent, because so much about those human interactions that we want to have with brands and consumers, those human values haven't changed. A lot of what was important before is still important now. So my other thought would be to focus on what's consistent, as well as this kind of big fear of the whole world changing.
That's a very, very good point. We have an amazing ability as humans to focus on the things that are different rather than the vast majority that might be the same. Jen?
Mine is, it's probably about ways of working for teams going forward. And how do ways of working with insight teams, and even that, and that then extrapolate that to consumers as well. So it's all around engagement. How do you engage with people? Because we used to talk about direct consumer engagement and indirect consumer engagement. So much more of it is now indirect, and you get so much more from face-to-face interactions, and that goes largely for teams as well, for insight teams as well. And I think that's going to be a challenge going forward. That we need to try and sort of like think about how we overcome it. And the other thing is it's going to cost, from the Scot, of course. I think that budgets are going to be really restricted, and that's going to be that will be difficult going forward. So therefore, we need to be more creative about how we resolve clients' problems for them in a more cost-effective manner.
Brilliant. But I think going back full circle to kind of one of the things you started with, Jen, trying to position that as a positive and how we actually get more from that creativity rather than it feeling like a compromise. Because as you rightly say, actually there is a great opportunity to do things not only cheaper and faster, but better as well.
Yeah, just look at the way small businesses or certain businesses in your local area, whatever, there's so many examples of how people have had to repurpose what they do for a living. And there's just a gazillion brilliant examples of how people have done it. They've been really, really creative. And I think lockdown has produced amazing creativity and brilliant creative stories.
Brilliant.
And let's continue with that.
Great. Well, a very positive, upbeat note to finish it on. Jen, thank you. Nicola, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, as well, for your questions, for your inputs. Really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. As Adam said, this will be going up on our social channels, so our YouTube, our LinkedIn in the next few days. So please keep an eye out for that. and more Ignites coming your way in weeks to come. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.